The Hanukkah story. Before we get too far into this message, I think we need to talk about some history. Alright, by the year 336 BCE, a fellow named Darius III had become the king of the Medes and the Persians. At the same time, an even more significant king, Alexander the Great, rose to power over a small Greek state. Alexander, who was a young fellow at about 20, was a brilliant military commander. Soon, his little Greek city-state of Macedonia began to spread its power throughout the known world. Even the massive, powerful kingdom of the Medes and the Persians could not stand against Alexander. By the time he was 30 years old, he had conquered the entire known world, down to Egypt, as far east as India, and all of Europe. His goal was to spread his Greek culture and to Hellenize the entire world. Meanwhile, the Jewish people had returned to the land of Israel from their Babylonian exile, and they had rebuilt the temple. But they remained subject to the dominion of imperial powers, first the Persian Empire, then later the conquering armies of Alexander the Great. The Talmud relates that when Alexander the Great and his conquering legions advanced upon Jerusalem, they were met by a delegation of elders, led by the high priest named Shimon HaTzadik. When Alexander saw Shimon approaching, he dismounted and prostrated himself before the Jewish sage. To his astonished men, Alexander explained that each time he went into battle, he would see a vision in the likeness of this high priest leading the Greek troops to victory. In gratitude, and out of profound respect for the spiritual power of the Jews, Alexander was a kind and generous ruler. He canceled the Jewish taxes during the sabbatical years, and even offered animals to be sacrificed on his behalf in the temple. Unfortunately, history would show that Alexander's heirs failed to sustain his benevolence. Upon the death of Alexander, his vast kingdom was divided among his generals. After a power struggle which engulfed all of the nations of the Middle East, Israel found itself under the sway of the Seleucid dynasty, Greek kings who reigned from Syria. Though at first the rule of the Seleucids was rather benign, there soon arose a new king, Antiochus IV, who was to wage a bloody war upon the Jews, a war which would threaten not just their physical lives, but also their very spiritual existence. Well, this brings us back to Antiochus. As you recall, in 171 BCE, Antiochus rises to power over Syria. Now he decides to call himself Epiphanes, which means God manifest. He thinks himself to be a god. But his detractors call him Epimanes, or Epimanes, which means madman. It was Antiochus's ambition to have a one-world power of government in which he is king. Gee, that sounds awful familiar. Now, this one-world government would be Hellenistic, and the whole world would be Hellenistic. I guess there is nothing new under the sun. All right, the Hellenistic concepts are the deification of nature. God is in everything. Now, this idea is what we see today. There's a pantheon of gods. There's just gods of every single kind. Today we're to be coexistent with everybody. We're tolerant of every single religion. And the third is the promotion of widespread immorality. We have that today. This is exactly the same New Age movement and the environmental movement we have today, going all the way back to 171 BCE. Okay, Antiochus makes a peace treaty with Israel. He signs a treaty with the brother of the high priest. Now this brother, whose name was Yehoshua, which means Yah is salvation, changes his name to a Greek equivalent of Jason. Now this treaty is going to give Antiochus rule over Israel in return for some protection. This is a protection scam is what it is. Now Jason pays Antiochus to be the high priest, pays him for his high priestness by making him the high priest over Israel. Jason promises to build a temple in Jerusalem to the Greek god Phallus and a gymnasium dedicated to Greek athletics. Okay, Antiochus goes off to war in Egypt. Now there's a whole lot of events that take place during this time, but anyhow, Jason comes to a conclusion, either by a false message or otherwise, that Antiochus had died. Jason tries to take control of Israel. Now Antiochus discovers this. He returns to Israel and he attacks and destroys Jerusalem. He kills thousands of Jews. He partially destroys the temple and robs it of all of its vessels, gold, and other things. The treaty is broken. On the Jewish month of Kislev, the 25th, in 168 BCE, Antiochus takes the temple in Jerusalem. He builds a statue in the outer court to Zeus, but the face of the statue looks like him. Now he sacrifices a pig to Zeus, and he sprinkles the blood of the pig in the Holy of Holies. He makes a broth from the pig body, and he pours it on the Torah scrolls and other scrolls, and he burns them. The temple is then made into a shrine to Zeus. Antiochus breaks the treaty with Israel, and he abolishes all biblical religious practice. He abolishes the biblical sacrifice, allowing only the pig to be sacrificed. He abolishes circumcision. He abolishes the use of Hebrew, allowing only Greek to be used. Now this is something, because Hebrew and Greek are not even similar languages, and it's difficult for a Hebrew-speaking person to speak Greek. If a Torah scroll was found in a home, the entire family was killed. If anyone was caught following kashrut, which is the eating of kosher in accordance with the Leviticus chapter 11, the whole family was killed. Now, many of the people and many of the priests accepted these new laws. So, in the interest of tolerance, some decided to go with Antiochus. Now, as you hear this, you might want to understand why it was that the Jews of Yeshua's day absolutely hated everything Greek. Okay, a stand is taken. Antiochus sends one of his commanders from Jerusalem to a tiny town called Modi'in. He intends to force the population to worship Zeus. When the commander gets there and his people, they set up a statue of Zeus, and he demanded that all of the people would sacrifice a pig and worship this god. The final act, of course, was going to be to eat pig meat. By eating the pig meat, they would honor Zeus. Now you know that eating pig meat is an abomination unto Yahweh for his people. The commander looked through the city for someone that he thought would follow the new religion. So he was going to look for an apostate priest, but he chooses a guy named Metiyahu. Now the word Metiyahu means gift of Yah. Well, Metiyahu refuses. But this apostate priest steps up and says, "Certainly, I'll do that." So he goes to perform the sacrifice. As soon as he is ready to perform the ceremony, a holy terror and a holy anger swelled up in Metiyahu, and he used a sword to kill the priest. Then he killed the commander. Mattiyahu's sons rose up and killed all of the troops that came with the commander and anybody else that was going to follow this new religion. Mattiyahu was called Mattiyahu the Maccabee. Mattiyahu and his sons fought a guerrilla war for 3 years before gaining support from the rest of the people. By this time, they became a very serious threat to Antiochus and his troops. Mattiyahu passed the leadership on to his son, Yehuda the Maccabee. Maccabee means hammer. Okay, some interesting points about the name Maccabee. There are several ways of spelling the word Maccabee. As we see here, we could spell it Maccabi, which means mallet or hammer, and refers to the hammer-like blows that Judah levied against the Syrian forces in his march to victory. It could also be Maccabi, which means extinguished or vanquished, and he certainly did that to the Greeks. The word Maccabee is also an acrostic, or can be an acrostic, from the first letters of the verses found in Exodus 15:11, which means, or which reads, Mikamoka bi'alim Yahweh, which is, who is like you, Yahweh, among the mighty ones. These words are also were used as Israel's battle cry, and were interpreted to mean, whosoever is on the side of Yahweh, follow me. Today, this word or this phrase is part of the synagogue service. The temple is regained. Yehuda Maccabee and his forces reclaimed the temple on Kislev the 25th in 165 BCE. The Maccabees cleaned the filth and the uncleanness out of the temple. The menorah, which is a symbol of Yahweh's light in the temple, had been broken, so they repaired it. Now there was only one bottle of the consecrated oil left, which would only light the menorah for 1 day. It would take another 8 days to make new consecrated oil. Now the reason for this was that it would take 7 days for the priests to be made clean. They used the 1 bottle of oil, and it burned for the whole 8 days. The temple was restored and rededicated to Yahweh. Now, it might be noted that Yeshua celebrated Hanukkah, and we see that in John 10:22. A few more things about Hanukkah. It is a celebration commemorating the miracle of the holy oil that lasted for 8 days until the new oil could be dedicated, as we just saw. The focus is on the event of the miracle itself, the miracle of the oil. The bare fact that a small cruse of this oil was left was all they could find, and it kept burning for the whole 8 days. The focus is not on the military victory of the Maccabees. As various commentators have pointed out, the net result is that this miracle was not particularly significant. The menorah could have been lit with impure oil if no oil were available, and in any event, after 8 days, the menorah would have been lit one way or another. In other words, this holiday celebrates the process, the means, and the fact that Yahweh performs miracles, and that is the background of all of Israel's existence, rather than a particular state or result. The 8th day forces us to concentrate on that point, forces us to continue Hanukkah beyond a natural cycle. One more theme of Hanukkah is that each day, as we light another candle, the miracle is measured in a relative increase compared to the previous day. More light, brighter light, in the continued process of learning and its deepening. The 8th day, or that extra day, when every candle is lit, carries over to the entire year. The Talmud emphasizes primarily the spiritual aspect of the Hanukkah miracles. Our sages have asked, what is Hanukkah? In other words, for which miracle was the holiday instituted? Their answer recounts the episode of the menorah without elaborating on the military victory over the Greeks. Although the miracle of the menorah could not have taken place without the military victory, the victory itself does not define Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a holiday of spiritual light. Even the war against the Greeks was essentially spiritual, since it was a struggle to preserve the Torah and the heritage that it presents from the taint of the secular influence of the Greeks. And I'd like to add that Hanukkah to me means more about the military victory, the fact that others, these Maccabees, and the others that were with them, stood up against the tyranny of the Greeks. We need to remember that as we look at the things happening in our world today. Shalom.